This is OFN Today on the Ourlads Football Network. We're going to talk Buffalo Bills football with Ryan Talbot, Bills writer with NewYorkUpstate.com and Syracuse.com. Before we introduce Ryan to the show, we're going to start off by welcoming in my co-host, another Ryan Dunleavy from the New York Post. How's it going, Ryan Dunleavy?
Good. Keep your Ryan.
Yeah, I don't know. You guys are the ones that are gonna have to keep it straight. Ryan Talbot, good to have you back talking Buffalo Bills football here on the network.
Hey, great to be on, guys. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so first of all, Ryan, let's talk about a couple of things that have been newsworthy with the Bills recently. Let's start off with the Brian Winters move. Because Winters was signed, and then what did they do? Did they drop Spencer Long? Does that mean that Brian Winters is the starting right guard right now?
I wouldn't say that he's the starting right guard right now. I think he's the favorite to be the starting right guard. John Feliciano, who started there last year, tore his pec or suffered a pec injury. That's going to have him out 8 to 12 weeks. He's hoping to be back around week 4 for that, around that time for that Raiders game. But with him out of action, that right guard spot was up for grabs, and Winters probably fits the mold best of what they're looking for in terms of the foot movement. The Bills like to pull their guards a lot, so I would say he's the favorite for the job, but he'll have to hold off some other players. Darrell Williams, for instance, could play right guard, right tackle for the Bills but I think he's more of a depth role at this point in his career. Ike Butker, who, probably flies under the radar. The Bills have liked him enough where they kept him on the 53-man roster all of last year, although he was inactive for most of the season, a younger player out of Iowa entering his third year. So they have some other options as well. Evan Baum, who they signed from the Dolphins as well. So a few different players there that they could start, but I think Winters is the favorite to win that job.
All right, I have two quick kind of newsworthy things, and then I'll let Ryan jump in here. One is the Ed Oliver news. So update us on what was going on there. The Ed Oliver news. Update us on what was going on there, because it was we hear you always hear, especially obviously Ryan Dunleavy knows this all too well with the DeAndre Baker situation. So right. What's going on with Ed Oliver?
Well, Ed Oliver had everything, all charges dropped against him. He was pulled over a few months back, and he was swerving on the road. Someone called it in. Police pulled him over on the side of the road. They gave him the breathalyzer. He tested .000, but he said recently with the media that the officer said that he still believed that Oliver was intoxicated. And he mentioned that in Montgomery County, there's something called a no refusal law, pretty much saying that if they say they're taking you to jail, you're going to jail. So he stayed there overnight. As soon as he was out, he had himself tested for alcohol, drugs, things like that. Everything came back clean. He said it was just a matter of him being tired. He had a big... on the back of his truck, he had his horses attached in the back, so he said it's very likely that he was tired. And when he started moving a little bit on the truck, obviously the back part started swaying as well. He said pretty much, though, he complied with the officers because he knows what can happen in America if you do not. So that's kind of gets you up to speed where he is. There was also a gun charge mixed in there, but if there's no alcohol in his system, the gun charge, which he had a permit for, gets dropped as well.
And then Ryan and we talked about this about a week ago, and I had completely missed the Jake Fromm text controversy from a few months ago, maybe because it came out right around the Drew Brees deal and a few other things, because I didn't even hear about it until one day I was looking, I don't even know what I was searching for, and maybe Fromm, and then I saw the text, and wow, I didn't even know that happened. Is that yesterday's news, or is that something that Jake Fromm is still going to have to deal with his rookie season?
No, I still think it's something he's going to have to deal with. I mean, when that news came out, obviously everything was being done virtually, so he can apologize over Skype or Zoom or whatever. But until he's in that locker room with those players, which they are now, and until he's proving what he's learned from that incident, I still think it's going to be something that kind of hovers over him throughout his rookie year. The thing is, this wasn't a text from when he was 14, 15, 16 years old. This was from 2019. So, saying that only elite white people should own guns within the last calendar year, that kind of probably rubs a lot of the players the wrong way, because they're saying, this wasn't something he said as a kid. This is something he said as a college athlete at Georgia to one of his friends, and he said he's learned from that experience. But obviously, that's been a big topic of conversation among the media, not just with Jake, but when we've talked with Brendan Bean and Sean McDermott. Even when we had Leslie Frazier shortly after that incident, and Leslie Frazier talked about it, and many players have been asked as well. Some say it's in the past. Jerry Hughes said something along those lines recently, but at the same time, there's going to be players in that locker room watching him and seeing how he is with his fellow teammates and what he's learned just from that incident in general.
Let's rewind it through the offseason to Stefon Diggs. How big an impact can he make for the Bills? Obviously, that's kind of the element that's been missing.
Yeah, I think he can make a huge impact that they added last year in John Brown and Cole Beasley. Brown across the board had a career year in terms of receptions, yards, et cetera. And Beasley in a few categories had a career year. It wasn't his best overall season. He had 1 year with the Cowboys that was pretty outstanding as well. But the fact that Josh Allen, who gets a lot of knocks as being an inaccurate quarterback, can do that with those two, you bring in a true number one wide receiver now. And I think that really opens up things for Allen, but also for Brian Daboll. You have to remember that Daboll likes to run that 11 personnel, and when he first started as the offensive coordinator, he had Kelvin Benjamin, Andre Holmes, Zay Jones, players along those lines as his top receivers, which, there's a reason that two of those names have been out of the league, and that Zay Jones is probably on the outside looking in possibly as well with the Raiders at this point in his career. They didn't have the right personnel, so now the personnel is there. Really, this is a huge year now for Josh Allen. And yes, I know there's still another year on the rookie deal. There's that fifth-year option that can get picked up at the end of this year. But this is huge for him because now you have arguably one of the best three wide receiver trios in the league. You have a young, promising tight end in Dawson Knox, who if he can get those catches or the drops under control, and you even have some nice young talent in the backfield. So if this offense doesn't take a significant step, either Daboll or Allen are going to be answering a lot of questions at the end of the year, and there could be real question marks about whether or not Allen is the long-term answer here. But adding Diggs, I think, was a no-brainer, especially a year in a pandemic where these rookie wide receivers, Minnesota ended up drafting Justin Jefferson. What are you going to get out of Justin Jefferson with such a shortened offseason? What are these teams going to get with Ruggs and all the other rookies taken in round one? You don't know. Some of them could acclimate to the system right away and be great fits, but more times than not, there's a learning curve, and this offseason is going to be difficult for a lot of rookies to become immediate impact players, where Stefon Diggs, yes, it's a new playbook, but he's going to be able to come in and make an impact day one.
You mentioned that knocks that Josh Allen gets. Do receivers you're around the team, do receivers like playing with Josh Allen? Do they get, because let's call it what it is, right? Stefon Diggs did not like playing with Kirk Cousins. He made that very clear on Twitter. Through, Odell Beckham style, throw your hands up in the air when a ball is errant. Is he gonna get frustrated playing with Josh Allen when he's open and the ball's not there?
He's saying all the right things right now, Diggs, that is. Diggs said he's here to win games. He said everyone's going to get the ball. There's enough to go around. Some weeks it might not be his number getting called. He actually argued the fact that he didn't necessarily say he wanted out of Minnesota. He said maybe people were reading too much into those tweets because he said he never specifically said it. But he's saying all the right things right now. Now, whether that changes as the games are going on, if the Bills are losing late in the game and he's not getting the ball, could we see some frustration? Absolutely. I wouldn't be surprised, because the best players in the league, that's what they want. But in terms of how other wide receivers and how other players treat Josh Allen, they love the guy. They say they would go to war for this guy. The offensive linemen say it. John Brown has said it, how much he loves Josh Allen. Cole Beasley talks about how much he loves it. And even Stefon Diggs after the trade said, Josh Allen, that guy's a dog, He remembered the Minnesota game in Josh Allen's rookie year where the Bills had been blown out in the first 2 weeks, one with Nathan Peterman as their starting quarterback, and two in Josh Allen's first start against the Chargers. But then that game, the Bills blew out the Vikings, and I believe one of the biggest upsets in terms of the point spread history in the NFL. So he said he remembers that a lot, the whole jumping over Anthony Barr. So far, so good, but we'll see when it's actual live game action.
Okay, Ryan, now this past offseason, Buffalo added 5 Carolina players, including Mario Addison, A.J. Klein, Vernon Butler, and Josh Norman. So we understand why. The coaches love their players they've worked with before, so I completely get that. Which one of those players do you think? And you know, you don't obviously have to go with, well, Addison. He's the one that's getting the most money, so he's the logical choice. But is there a player that you think might actually impact this defense the most? It could be Addison.
It is going to be Addison. You know, it is. The one thing that this team has kind of lacked is a consistent pass rush. And I know Addison, you know, you don't know when they're going to hit that wall when they get up there in age, but he's a guy that's had, 9 sacks or more in the last 4 years. He's a guy that's been consistently getting after the quarterback. You bring over the defensive line coach, former defensive coordinator as well, Eric Washington from Carolina. So he's going to know that the ins and outs of that system, just like Vernon Butler will as well. But he's going to know all that terminology. There's not going to be even any learning curve there from the defensive line coach standpoint. But if you have him on one side, you have Jerry Hughes, a healthy Jerry Hughes on the other. Hughes played throughout last season with a wrist injury. That's going to be pretty good on the outside. You have a promising defensive tackle in Ed Oliver, who really came on in the second part of his rookie season, second half of the year. And then you added a Vernon Butler, a Quentin Jefferson, a guy who had a lot of quarterback pressures, maybe didn't record the sacks last year, but got after the quarterback a lot. And I think that's what this defense has been missing. You have 2 linebackers that fly after the ball. You have a pretty solid secondary. The Bills have done a nice job there. They have a shutdown corner in Trey White. They have one of the best safety duos in the league. And no matter who's been there at cornerback too, whether it's E.J. Gaines in 2017, Levi Wallace kind of from that point on, and now Josh Norman thrown in the mix. They've been able to work with whoever's been in that cornerback 2 spot, but it's been that consistent pressure that they've been lacking. And I think that Addison, for that reason, is going to be a really big piece for this defense in 2020.
And with the corners, White, that was a breath of, I wouldn't say fresh air, that would be, but a sigh of relief. Let's put it that way. A sigh of relief that he made the announcement that he was going to play. With Norman coming in, here's a guy who knows the system, felt that the system in Washington wasn't to his liking, and he won't have to be counted on as the number 1 corner. White will be. So, wow, that's a huge deal for the Bills to not only get the good news that White's playing, but also to bring in Norman, and that should give them, as you mentioned already with the safeties, one of the best secondaries in the league.
Yeah, I think the Bills Mafia were refreshing Twitter frantically last week to kind of wait and see on that deadline what Trey White was going to do. He had a lot of fans worried, nervous, but at the same time, had White chosen to opt out, I think the majority of the fan base had said they would have respected that decision. There's always a few in the crowd that would have been really negative on Twitter. That's what Twitter is at the end of the day, but he has young kids at home at the end, but he ended up opting in to play this year. He actually tweeted last night that he feels better coming into this season than ever before, and he's kind of ticked off at the way 2019 ended. And I'm sure he meant the playoff game, but if he meant for his own personal performance, that's saying something because he was a first-team All-Pro. But, yeah, I mean, the Bills probably exhaled as well when they found out that Trey was going to play because there's a huge difference having Trey White on one side and then filling in that other spot with Wallace and Norman than it would have been having Norman and Wallace as your 2 starters with very little depth behind them in terms of those outside cornerbacks. So, yeah, the defense would have been up in the air, a big question mark in terms of what they would have looked like had White opted out.
What about take me to the offensive backfield now? Let's go from defensive backfield to offensive backfield. Devin Singletary, workhorse or not a workhorse? Because I was surprised when the Bills picked Zach Moss in the Zach Moss in the 3rd round. I was surprised by that. Is that a young split tandem, or what's the story there?
I think as the season goes on, that's a young split tandem. But I think early on, you have to make Singletary your workhorse. And I know running back among the positions is probably the easiest to get up to speed on for a rookie. But at the same time, the Bills aren't going to throw Moss out there if they don't know what he's going to be like in blitz pickup situations, if they don't know how, if he doesn't know all the ins and outs of the playbook, the alerts, the hot reads, et cetera, et cetera. So early on, I think you're going to treat this like last year, where last year you had Frank Gore as the number one, Singletary was eased into the lineup. And then as the season went on, and especially after Singletary returned from a hamstring injury, he really came on and started taking those reps away. So early on, if I were to guess, I think maybe you make Moss maybe a short yardage kind of guy, maybe a goal line kind of back. And then you work his reps up. But by the end of the year, could I see it being closer to a 50-50 split? Absolutely. There's a lot to like about Moss's game. He is not just an inside the tackle bruiser. He can go to the outside. He can catch the ball out of the backfield. He is. I thought that was a great value pick in round 3 in terms of where I thought he might go. I thought he was a late second rounder personally on my little board of running backs. So to have that young tandem's promising, but early in the year, let Singletary go. Let him be your number one. I know he didn't have the significant amount of carries at the end of the day last year, but when you look at his yards per carry, he was right up there with Derrick Henry in terms of yards per carry. He was very elusive with the ball in his hands. I wouldn't say he had fumbling issues, but there were a few games where teams were able to knock it out once or twice. So that's something to monitor, because I know that the one thing that Sean McDermott hates is turnovers. So if that becomes an issue, you might see Moss get a bigger role sooner rather than later.
What's the story with fans up there? Are they going to be is it a no fans? Are they already? It seems like every NFL team's doing it a little differently, right? Like some are holding out hope, some are no fans already for all season. Where do the Bills stand? Because Bills Mafia, I feel like that fans matter up there.
Oh, fans definitely matter. The players have said as much. You're right. Right now, they're at a no fan situation. However, that's not set in stone. I know for a fact that the Bills have sent out things to their employees saying, if things change, here's how it will work. So, yeah, exactly. The big if situation. But I wouldn't be shocked that maybe midway in the season, if we get maybe 25% capacity or 33% capacity, I think 50% is probably pushing it, because I don't know how you can really limit the tailgating if you get too many fans there early on. But I would think that 25-33% is something that could happen as the year goes on.
Sticking with that topic, COVID, a lot of several key players, I should say, that are either not going to play or are on the list. So talk a little bit about, Star Lotulelei, he's not playing this year, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And when he came out for the draft many years ago at this point, he's a grizzled veteran. He had a heart issue, so I would have to think that maybe that played a factor in his decision. So he might be one of those players that's getting that $350,000 stipend. But he has a legitimate reason. Not that players that opt out without an issue, a medical issue, don't, because a lot of them have young kids at home, family members that they're worried about. But his decision, I think, definitely made a lot of sense when you looked at his career history and that he had a heart issue in the past. And then E.J. Gaines was the other player. Love E.J. Gaines. When he's on the field, he can be a difference maker. The problem with Gaines is he has trouble staying healthy. He didn't make it out of training camp last year with the Bills before he was put on the IR, didn't play anywhere last season. 2 concussions, I believe, in 3 weeks with the Browns the year before that. And then his great year with the Bills, he only played 11 games. He missed 5 games with injuries. So it's been one thing after the other. He would have been great depth for this team, but at the same time, he wasn't necessarily someone that was going to be depended on based on his injury past. But those are the only 2 players that ended up opting out. And as of right now, the Bills don't have anyone on their reserve COVID list. Everyone that had been on it have been taken off that list at this point.
Okay. Now let's talk about a big plus for the Bills. Maybe if I'm thinking of one team in the NFL that might be able to handle the COVID situation better, it's the Bills. Entire offensive line, well, now Winters is the only change. All the depth also on the line is returning. You got the front office, the staff, except as you mentioned, Eric Washington comes in. 20 of 22 starters. Again, Brian Winters may be the only other one that makes a change there, because Alexander's gone and Diggs is in. That's just so much continuity that you're looking for in this type of an offseason that has to give them an edge, and they need then to take advantage of that early on in the season.
Oh, without a doubt. No team has more continuity than the Bills in terms of returning snaps from 1 year ago. And you guys kind of mentioned it earlier in the show that the Bills also brought in a lot of players from
Yeah.
Carolina. So, yeah, they weren't with the Bills last year, but those are all players that know the playbook, that know the system. They brought back Tywan Jones. Now, Jones is not going to be a factor on offense, but he's going to be their bell cow, I believe is what Lorenzo Alexander called him, on special teams. Tyler Matakevich doesn't have any connection to this team, but a huge special teams upgrade. But even Quentin Jefferson, he knew Dan Morgan, who's in the front office there with the Bills. So a lot of these guys have ties to either the front office, coaches, and Eric Washington is such an upgrade over the defensive line coach that left to go to college. Based on his career, based on the fact that throughout his career, his defensive lines have racked up quite a few sacks, and he's had a lot of success in this league. So, yeah, the continuity is there. Even those players that they brought in from Carolina kind of fit into that continuity mold. So you look especially across the AFC East, the Bills should be able to do some damage. Yes, after the Patriots signed Cam Newton, the odds kind of went back to the Patriots as the favorite, but then they lost 8 players to the opt-outs, and some significant ones, especially on defense in Hightower and in Chung. And then on offense, you lose Marcus Cannon. I still, Dante Scarnecchia retiring is a bigger loss than a lot of people talk about. This is a guy that's talked about as the greatest offensive line coach in history. So that Patriots team, I think, is very beatable for the first time in a long time. You look at the Jets, and again, I hate to say they lost their 2 best defensive players, obviously Jamal Adams in a trade, but we only saw Mosley in 2 games last season. But if you remember that week 1 game against the Bills, he was a difference maker. The Bills could not do much on offense. They moved the ball a few times, but it ended up in turnovers. But they couldn't do much until he was out of that lineup. So they've lost that. And yeah, the Jets signed a lot of offensive linemen. They drafted one early. I still think that offense, I don't think they've done Sam Darnold any favors throughout his career with the Jets, but especially now, as you're getting closer to his option. And the Dolphins, kudos to the Dolphins. I do think that they've shortened their rebuild significantly via free agency in the draft, but I still think they're 1 year away from really contending just because of that continuity aspect. Sure. There's so many new pieces. And who knows when Tua is going to get out there, but do you really want to rush a rookie quarterback onto the field in this offseason where you haven't had OTAs, where you're not going to have a preseason? I think that's going to be Fitzpatrick's job for at least half the season, but time will tell on that matter.
And last offseason, the Bills made it a priority to upgrade the special teams, and it worked. They were one of the worst in 2018. They were kind of middle of the road last year, so they made improvement. The punter's interesting because he had one of the worst net averages, yet he had one of the best inside the 20, and that's really important. 34, I believe, inside the 20. Of course, Andre Roberts came in. He was a top 10 kick returner, punt returner. So the question then this year is what's going on with the kicking game, because you still have Hauschka, the veteran. He's, especially if you're trying to win a Super Bowl playoff team, you want to have that veteran in the playoffs. You brought in the kid that the Jets had to no success in the Bills game last year, but you got to tell me what role he's going to be in, and then they drafted Tyler Bass.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. The kicker job is obviously down to Hauschka and Bass. That's just it right there. Now, the problem is Bass was the number 1 kicker on a lot of draft boards. A lot of draft analysts had him as the number 1 kicker in this draft. And you don't draft someone in round 5 if you're not going to give him a legitimate shot to take over the job. But we've also seen a lot of high pedigree kickers come in, and they can't handle the pressures of the NFL. So you're right. This is a year where the Bills are expected to win the AFC East, make a little bit of a run possibly in the playoffs. And do you want that on the shoulders of a rookie kicker? So that's going to be one of those battles that we're not going to see much of. We won't get to see it because of, a lot of this camp being at the stadium, only a limited number of media being allowed in there. But if things are even close to 50-50, or if Hauschka leaves any window of opportunity, I think you have to go with the young kid, just because at some point you have to rip the Band-Aid off and go with youth. And if you're going to try to sneak Bass onto your practice squad, I don't think it's going to happen, because there's going to be a lot of teams looking for kickers in week 1, week 2 that, give up on these veterans that aren't working out for them. And Bass is going to be high on your board. Now, Hauschka, if he does get let go, he'll find a home immediately as well. So that's the tough call there. Do you keep 2 kickers? I don't know how you can with this roster, with the spots that they're all going to have to make decisions on, but maybe that's a possibility as well. You mentioned Vedvik coming in from the Jets. He is going to solely be a punter for Buffalo. That's all he's worked on since he was a free agent last year. So, again, I would love to see what he could do against Bajorquez, but we're not going to. Bajorquez was very good inside the 20, but the net punting wasn't necessarily there. Some games he looks like he's going to be a great punter. Other games he's so inconsistent. You're like, what's he doing on the field? Why haven't they replaced this guy? It's kind of maddening. So that's tough. Roberts, though, Roberts ended up in the top 10, like you said, in those categories as a kick returner and things like that. He didn't necessarily break any off last year, but the reason the Bills love this guy is he protects the ball. If you remember early on in the regime, they had Ray McLeod back there, and he had his issues handling the ball. And the Bills cannot take players that they can't trust with the ball. So Roberts may not be flashy. He may not rip off those long runs anymore, but he's a reliable kick returner. And when those punts are up in the air, he's going to field them, 99 out of 100 times. So that kind of talks about that. And I've already mentioned Matakevich and Taiwan Jones as well. So they added further upgrades there as well.
By the way, if Hauschka gets cut by the Bills, I could see the Jets picking him up.
Oh, I could see a lot of teams making a play for Hauschka. He had a little bit of a rough patch last year. That Thanksgiving game, he missed a field goal. He missed an extra point. I think he had a double doink, at least one doink, and it went in. But after that game, the Bills tried to sign McLaughlin, the Chase McLaughlin, who they had on their roster during the preseason last year. And he ended up getting claimed, I want to say, by the Colts. He was on a few different rosters
Colts
last year, so I can't remember which team. Okay. Can't remember which team ended up claiming him ahead of the Bills, but that's where he ended up. And then, to Hauschka's credit, rest of the regular season he was solid. He was perfect in the playoffs, but one of his strengths when they signed him was on kicks of 50 yards or more. He really doesn't have the leg for that anymore. So at the end of the day, that's where Bass comes in. He has a huge leg. He's a guy that if he proves he can show some accuracy, he can make it from 60 plus with ease. So that's going to be the most interesting battle on special teams by far.
I got two big picture questions for you. First, they both build off things you just said. One is, what's a success for the Bills this year? Do they have to win the division to be a success? Like you said, they were the favorite, then they're not the favorite. Do they have to win the division? Do they just have to get a wild card and win a playoff game and get to the round four? How would you qualify, keeping in mind the Patriots don't have Tom Brady and the Bills have been knocking on the door? What's a successful year for the Bills?
First AFC East title since 1995 and at least one playoff win. If you don't get both, I don't think it's a successful year. If you look at all the additions that this team has made through Brandon Beane's tenure as GM, if you look at where they're positioned now with a true number one wide receiver, a top 5 defense, and a special teams unit that should be improved as well. Yeah, anything short of that, I think, would be a disappointment for the Bills and for their fan base.
And Beane was my other one. Obviously, the primary team I cover for the New York Post is the Giants. Brandon Beane worked under Dave Gettleman in Carolina. It seems like they compete for ex-Panthers all offseason. Who's going to sign this guy? What's being done that the other guys haven't done, that his predecessors in Buffalo haven't done? What have been his tenets, really, that he's had success with the Bills kind of quickly that other guys before him didn't do?
This might not jump off the page, but one thing he's done really well is signing veterans to short contracts that don't put the Bills in a hole. The previous GM, Doug Whaley, made some really nice in-season signings. He signed some guys to mega deals, but he also put the Bills in a terrible cap situation that Brendan Beane had to fix. And to his credit, he fixed within 2 years. Yeah. He came in after the 2017 draft, so you can't give him credit for Trey White or Matt Milano. He wasn't there for that draft, but he's drafted well since then. He did what he needed to do to go up and get a franchise quarterback. They fell in love with Josh Allen, and at the end of the day, they ended up trading Cordy Glenn to kind of move up into the first round. Then they moved some other assets to move up to get Allen. Then they moved up to get Trey Edmonds, who, Edmonds, he was 20 years old when he started as a rookie. He's entering his third year, and he's still younger than I think some of the linebackers that were drafted this season. And you already saw him coming off of a Pro Bowl year. So he's done a really good job of identifying players and their fits, whether it's the draft and free agency. But he's so smart about it. You look at some of these deals that these offensive linemen have signed in free agency this year. Now, mind you, Quentin Spain was a guard, but to get Quentin Spain on a 3-year, $15 million deal before the start of free agency, and then you see some of these other guys getting a lot more money than that. Josh Norman, you could say maybe they paid a little bit too much for him, but it's a 1-year deal. If they want to cut Trent Murphy, for instance, this season, that's $7+ million that they can roll over next year. So he not only does he sign guys, but he has these outs in these deals that doesn't hurt the Bills long term, and he keeps them financially viable. So that probably is something that he does better than any other GM that we've seen in the last decade plus.
All right, I'm going to wrap it up with rookies. So last couple of minutes, talk about some of not the top guys, because we did wrap up the rookie draft a few months ago, so that's available on demand on our network. But just from anything you've heard since then, since our last conversation, especially the fact that the team has brought in the 2 mid-round receivers to add size. They both reportedly have good hands. You got the 7th-round corner, Dane Jackson, who they also got in the Diggs trade, by the way, that pick. And he's got a lot of experience playing ACC football for, I think, 4 years of experience. And they even have a very intriguing rookie free agent, Trey Adams, who a couple of years ago was a first-round draft pick type talent. So talk a little bit about some of the rookies that people may not be aware of that could have an impact for the Bills this season.
Yeah, I'll start with Gabe Davis, the 4th-round wide receiver. John Brown gushed about Gabe Davis and Isaiah Hodgins with the media 2 days ago. He pretty much said that those guys know the playbook better than the veterans on this team, which is saying something because Brown's entering year 2, Beasley's entering year 2. Some of them have been there longer than that. They said that when they got together in Florida and when they got together this offseason, that Gabe Davis knew both of them knew the hot reads, knew the alerts. But he really praised Davis, saying that this is a guy that can play all 3 positions. I could see him coming in and being that wide receiver 4 for this team, because there's still question marks on this roster in terms of who would take that role otherwise. So I think he has a chance to make an immediate impact. Now, mind you, it's wide receiver 4, so what does an immediate impact look like? Is it 25, 30 receptions by the end of the year? That'd be pretty solid considering the top 3 guys in front of him, in my opinion. Isaiah Hodgins is a guy that I think is going to make this roster because, again, they like what he brings from a size perspective. I think that they thought there was good value there late in the draft on day 3. He's going to have to beat out guys like Isaiah McKenzie, who's been a gadget receiver for them. Robert Foster, who was really strong at the end of 2018, but was pretty quiet in 2019. Players like that, but there's definitely a path for him to make this roster, but he may be more of a special teams contributor. And obviously there's Duke Williams, too, that he'd have to beat out there as well. Dane Jackson, I think that E.J. Gaines' opt-out boded very well for his chances of making that roster. He's not a guarantee as a 7th-round pick by any means, but he's a guy that I think they believe can play inside or outside. But especially on the inside, I think he's a fit there just because Taron Johnson, as good as he's been in his first few years with Buffalo, he's been banged up a few times and he's been taken out of games for a few series, been out of games for a few weeks at a time. So he can make an impact there as well. And then the undrafted free agents, Trey Adams, it's going to be hard for him to make this roster, but I think he'd be an ideal candidate for that 16-man practice squad, try to develop him. Just because they have some veterans. I mentioned Darrell Williams already. They have Tyne Secchi, who they like as well. Cody Ford's coming back. I think he's going to end up being the starting right tackle. And obviously they like Deion Dawkins a lot at left tackle. So tough path there for him. And I feel bad for a guy like Reggie Gilliam, who out of Toledo, I think in a normal offseason, he really could have pushed Patrick DeMarco for that fullback job. Because he was a standout on special teams during his career in Toledo, something like 6 block kicks or 7 block kicks in the last few years. But he's going to have a hard path making this roster as well. But he could be another guy that could sneak onto their practice squad.
All right, Ryan, great job as always. Again, it's NewYorkUpstate.com and Syracuse.com. And we look forward to talking to you at least a few times during the season. We have our Jets FM show. We'd like to have you on whenever the Jets play the Bills. And we'll definitely look forward to having you on here again as well. So fingers crossed that we have a season. And speaking as a Jet fan, I'm actually happy there'll be no fans at the Bills game week 1. That'll give the Jets a little bit of an advantage. But I appreciate it as always, Ryan. Thanks a lot.
Hey, thank you. Have a good one, guys.
Take care. All right, Ryan Talbot. Again, you can check him out and on the yeah. Oh wow. See, I didn't do a good job there, did I? I forgot to put I didn't even put the damn ticker on this show. I left the ticker out. I was just gonna point to the ticker and say, you see, you've got Ryan Talbot's website and you have his Twitter. So here it comes now. Anyway, what do you think about? I mean, you seem to be a little bit surprised that Ryan said that it was division plus playoff win or bust season.
Yeah, I was surprised. I would think one or the other would check off the improvement box for the Bills. I mean, look, we know that once the Patriots signed Cam Newton, they went back to the favorite. So if you get a wild card and you win a playoff game, or if you somehow upset, to me, anybody winning the division against the Patriots for the first time in however 20 years, second time in 20 years, I think it is, that's a successful season. I don't care what happens in the playoffs, especially the Bills haven't won a playoff game in 20 years. So to have to do both, that seems like a lot. But, I mean, hey, they certainly have invested in the team. And, look, it's the AFC, right? So you know the Final Four teams are probably going to be the Ravens, the Chiefs, the
Houston.
Houston. The AFC has a lot of really good teams, right?
You got Phillip Rivers and the Colts this year.
Tennessee, we're forgetting Tennessee was leading in the
AFC
championship game. So to have to be one of the Final Four teams in the AFC is a monumental task this year.
It would be interesting if they actually won the division and then had to play the Patriots, Buffalo.
It would be.
And that would be the game that they'd have to win in order to certify that their season was a success. But look,
they better playing like the Texans again or something like that.
But really thinking about it, and this is what we'll continue to talk about all the way through, as we just mentioned with Ryan, because they have an edge over so many other teams with the continuity coming back from front office to players, they have got to take advantage of that.
Yeah, they do. But again, I think one or the other qualifies as taking advantage of it when you're, when you're in the NFC. I mean, it'd be different if you're in the NFC.
What would you rather have? One playoff win, or winning the division?
The division, you get to hang a banner.
Yeah, I agree.
The equivalent is in the NFL. Like, banners is more of a basketball thing, but you get to put up something on your stadium for winning the division. You don't get to put one up for beating the Titans
wild card.
game.
Yeah, nobody cares about that really. Okay, so that wraps it up so we had an opportunity to talk to Evan Lazar. By the way, I did confirm with Evan that Evan will be doing a New England Patriot report on the network every week starting this season. So we're working on a few other things as well with Evan. So he does a really good job, and that's great for the network. We'll talk to you on Friday, Ryan. And again, I'm sure we'll be talking about the virus and how it's impacting the league, but hopefully we'll have a lot of other new things to talk about. Can you, before I let you go, is there one story this week outside of college football in the NFL that's been like a big story?
That's it. I think I wrote today about how it affected the draft and kind of called some scouts and some front office people and just said, look, if there's no college football, what happens to the draft? Does it get pushed back? Yeah. Remember this, Greg. If there was no college football last year, if there was a pandemic last year, who is Joe Burrow today? He's the third string quarterback for the Packers trying to make the team. Like, he certainly isn't the number one overall pick with the $36 million contract without last college football season. So I just think the whole draft is going to be a little screwed up. All the guys who would have shot up boards this year, they disappear, and it's really on those area scouts to uncover the
And it's going to be even really difficult if the ACC and the SEC play and then the other conferences don't. Because if everybody decides to shut it down, and you could probably get a good percentage of the players that obviously will have eligibility for the next season that'll say, okay, like you said, I have to improve my draft stock. I will come back as just like the grad transfers do. I'll come back for another year to up my stock. But if we have a couple of conferences playing football, including Trevor Lawrence, that's going to make things really damaging for the draft.
Wild.
All right, Ryan, we'll talk more about that on Friday. Thanks a lot as always.